guest today is Dr. Gaurav Banga, the CEO and founder of Balbix, an AI-powered cybersecurity risk management startup. Gaurav is an accomplished inventor with over 50 patents to his name, and he has a deep background in founding and leading multiple successful tech ventures. His journey into entrepreneurship is unique. It began over a decade ago when he was inspired by a book that eventually led him to leave academia and pursue his passion for deep tech. Gaurav regularly speaks with CISOs, gaining firsthand insights into the biggest challenges as they navigate an increasingly complex cybersecurity landscape. As regulatory scrutiny around security disclosures intensifies, Gaurav offers a unique perspective on how AI can reshape the future of risk management, helping organizations strike the right balance between innovation and security. Thank you so much for being with us on the show today, Gaurav. It's a real honor to have you.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
So looking at your LinkedIn, which is what I do for all guests before they come on the podcast, I can see you started studying computer science as an undergrad back in 1990, which was well before the dot-com bubble and mainstream understanding of how computers were going to change everything. What initially drew you to computer science when it maybe wasn't as glamorous as it is today?
Well, yeah, absolutely. It was certainly not as glamorous as it is today. And when I grew up in India, so where a lot of people had never seen a computer before, and
Right.
not me. So I was in ninth grade, and it was over the summer, and there was an extra course on something. I'd never seen a computer before in my life. There was an extra course, summer course, and say, hey, learn how to do basic programming. And I can't describe the feeling when I had that course. It was like, really, I was born for this. I mean, this is it. And it was a journey after that because computer science was not an official subject, if you will, in my school or high school, 10th and 11th grade after that. So I had to wait that to learn myself, the things that. But mostly I had to become very good at maths and science and all that. So I could get accepted into an undergraduate program in computer science.
Very cool. Yeah, at my university, computer science was actually part of the math department before it joined engineering eventually, so a little bit of the history there. So after that, you went on to finish a PhD in 1998, which I think would have been a wild time to join the industry. Anybody who was around at that time would know that tech was taking off like a rocket ship. I've never seen another thing like it in my life. And then a couple of years later, the bubble burst and all these companies just collapsed and a lot of people lost their jobs and it was a lot of chaos. What was it like coming into that industry at that time for you?
Yeah, so it was a little bit of, I had a little bit of an early preview into what was going to happen, although I did not expect anything like what it was. So my PhD work was on some of the technologies that were underpinning the internet. So the whole theory of doing what I was doing in my PhD program was that the internet is the new supercomputer, if you will. What can you do with this supercomputer? Apparently, a lot of different things, not just weather forecasting and weapons development and that kind of stuff. It can do a lot. So it really was getting to see a ringside view before it was happening. And then, I originally wanted to be a faculty member, a professor. I said, yeah, I'll do that later. Let me first go and have some fun over here. Or at least be part of this explosion that's happening. Fortunately, I was not in a .com company. I was at NetApp, and I was supporting the .com companies. So yes, we had a rocky landing. It was just amazing. I'll tell you a story. We had to go back and back to work in the morning, and used to park our cars next to the office. It was a regular one building, two buildings at that time, office in Santa Clara. And then one day they came up, and the parking lot was gone. I mean, how can a parking lot disappear?
Right.
Apparently, Yahoo had created a 10th data center. So Yahoo was a neighbor, and they had run out of data center space. So we created a 10th data center. And all the machines are out there, and it can only happen in Silicon Valley. Right? And there was no place to park. Right? There was literally no place to park for about 200 people. What do? You figure it out.
Yeah.
So that was my story. And then we had a fairly, I would say, not so rocky bottom landing because we were not a .com ourselves, but customers were .com. And we had enough non-.com companies, so we survived. And that was my .com experience.
Okay. Yeah, that doesn't sound like as bad as it was for many people. So happy you didn't get too hurt in that. So we've been talking a lot about AI from a technology standpoint on this podcast lately, and I'm interested at how you see AI as it relates to regulatory compliance. Oh, actually, before I go into that, I'll have to ask you about your company. I missed that question, so we'll cut that out. Um, and today you are the founder of a Bay Area company called Balbix, which leverages AI to help organizations reduce risk. Can you tell us a little bit about your mission and how Balbix is tackling that problem?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my last startup, I had a lot of Fortune 500, Fortune 100 as my customers. And one of the things I was very curious about was, where is this thing going and what the bigger challenges are? My old company was in the endpoint space, and the endpoint is only one component. And what we found out was that the attack surface was exploding. The number of different ways, the number of different places in which bad things could happen, just as back in 2015, was just quite literally exploding. Mm-hmm. And along with it was the number of startup companies. So the question in the minds of many of my friends, CISOs, customers, old customers, was that how are we going to manage all this? What is going to be the big picture? And then how are we going to make sure that our operations are not distracted with all the 10,000 different things, 10,000 different directions in which they could be pulled? So that became this whole genesis, maybe AI can help. And I knew a little bit about AI, of course, but having studied computer science, but not a whole lot. And went back, figured out, built a team, figured out, what was it about AI that you want to use, and hired some AI experts, put the whole platform together, started evolving AI because the AI at that time was not good enough for the purposes that we were. And so we have been part of that AI generation that kind of grew up all the way from, the evolution from deep learning to large language models and, GPTs. So we've been part of that evolution. We've been, and our platform, what it really does is it solves two problems in cybersecurity. The first problem is the problem of how do you analyze massive amounts of dirty data that is coming from arguably dozens of different tools and sometimes hundreds of people that are working together. And what do they see? What part of the attack surface do they see? How fast do people work? What are the blind spots? All of this data is somewhat contradictory. It's incomplete. It's overlapping. How do you make sense of it to get a sense of, are we doing okay or not? And if you're not, then what's the gap? And what do you do about that? So AI actually turns out to be a very good way to deal with that because AI can slice through petabytes of data every day, and human beings cannot. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, not that we cannot, it's just impossible to do that. And even if you apply...
What a horrible existence, even if you could, right?
Several lifetimes even for a large team to analyze even a single petabyte of data. So the second way in which we use AI is to solve the communication problem. Now, the cybersecurity is a fairly technical thing. It's like when a cybersecurity operational person, like a director of vulnerability management or an IT guy responsible for patching, or even a CISO sometimes, let's say the CISO, she has got to go to a board meeting. They all struggle with this thing, like how this is a very technical topic. There's lots of technical bells and whistles and lots of nuances and vocabulary. How do you explain that to a business stakeholder, like a CEO or a CFO or a board member or a business unit, right? And so that's the communication problem. And communication problems are hard because if you don't solve them, you don't get the funding, you don't get deprioritization, you don't get demobilization in the organization. And if you scratch the communication problem, you get alignment, you get mobilization, you get risk reduction. It is always a good thing to shareholders, right? Mm-hmm. So we use AI, and we use a fairly unique approach to AI to solve these two problems. And the net of it is people are aligned better off, they understand each other much better, and you can understand what your problems are, and you can burn down risk to acceptable levels in a matter of a few months or weeks sometimes.
Oh, very cool. Sounds like a very practical approach to solving a big problem. Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about AI from a technology standpoint on this podcast lately, but I'm interested how you see AI, especially as it relates to regulatory compliance. I know that's something that you deal with quite a bit in the work that you do. I'm a big fan of Jen Easterly and the work the fine folks over at CISA are doing, and I've been following her a lot in the press in the last couple of years. And she was recently quoted as saying, makers of insecure software are the enablers of the real villains. And if I had to make a prediction, it would be that there's going to be some massive regulatory changes coming in this next administration once the presidential election's over. Just wanted to know how you saw that and if you had any thoughts around that.
All right, it's a good insight, and as you know, like you, I'm a big fan of the work that Jen has done and has been doing, and our team has been doing. Part of it is just raising the profile of the cybersecurity problem that we have and looking at different ways. CISA does his work every day.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the challenges with the concept of secure by design is at how, right? If you think about it, right, here's the problem with software. The problem with software is like this, right? It's a problem that human beings are physically incapable of writing perfect software.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens for a variety of reasons, but it's like saying, why do human beings make mistakes? Well, because they're human.
Yeah.
They're not worker, right? So every few thousand lines of code that a programmer writes that introduce, because of a mistake, they introduce a bug. And we're all very familiar with them, right? And every few 10,000 lines of code, they introduce a special kind of bug called a security bug. Now, I'm just giving you average numbers. Their numbers could be different. For there are very good programmers that made mistakes every 10,000 lines and made security bugs every 100,000 lines. But the average is what I told you, right?
Yeah.
Now, when you look at 100 million lines of software code, and for example, the infrastructure that you and I are using right now to talk to each other, it's riddled with security bugs. And these bugs will be found and they will be ultimately used against us, some of them, many of them. Right? So that's one problem of cybersecurity and cyber insecurity. It's pretty fundamental, right? I mean, because how do you fix it?
Yeah.
The only way to fix it is to stop making mistakes. Now, how do you stop making mistakes? Right? So the other problem in cybersecurity is that as users of software, we also make mistakes. Software has gotten so good in presenting an alternative reality, that phishing email that is so real and it tugs you at your heart's emotions, right? I mean, it says, hey, you just, like, for example, if somebody sent me an email saying, you just made the Gartner Magic Quadrant, I'm going to click on that.
Yeah. Late in the afternoon when you're tired. And yeah.
And for a lot of people, it's you just won $1 million, you win $1 billion, you win $10 million. The president of the United States is inviting you to the White House to sit down and talk. And well, right? So that's the challenge. As human beings, we also make mistakes. And now here's the challenge, right? I'm very, very good. I've been studying computer science for a long time. I've been in the cybersecurity industry. So I make one mistake every 2 years. And let's say there's 10,000 of me that work for you. So how many mistakes are you going to make every hour as an organization?
That's tough math off the top of my head, but a lot. Yeah.
So that's really what it comes down to, is that this is the cyber insecurity equation, which is that a lot of mistakes and therefore a lot of ways for the bad guys to come in there. So when you talk about designing secure software, it's hard. And I personally believe that it's impossible to design secure software components. You might be able to put together a resilient system, right, which has enough checks and balances, boundaries, if you will, that a mistake is limited in time and in space. Right? So this is unfortunately not a concept for which there's a lot of economic incentive exists. And this is where the role of regulatory compliance and the stuff that Jen is talking about comes in. Because the only reason why when there is no economic incentive, you have to create an artificial incentive, not an artificial, it's a synthetic incentive, because you're bringing in costs that are being paid somewhere else on somebody else's balance sheet. And you're bringing it back to your balance sheet.
Yeah. Do you think the culture in Silicon Valley, this move fast and break things and time to market and all those things are probably one of the bigger culprits in this problem?
I think it is that, but more importantly, it is something else. I think more importantly, it's that it's, how one of the roles of education is to prepare people for the industry. And that's where a lot of the culture comes in. So, for example, if for example, the education system stops producing people who are comfortable with math, right? then you're not going to be very good at solving hard problems that require math in the industry, right? So I think it's just that as the entire software industry and the software education system, we have not paid enough attention, right, to writing what Jen is calling secure software, and which what I call is building resilient systems, right? Which is really what a secure software system is, right? And that is a much bigger problem than the Silicon Valley culture of going, and go. So what will happen is that at least in the near future, a certain amount of cost has to be paid out to carry over this debt, or to pay for this debt that we have of insecure systems. And concepts like zero trust and concepts like adaptive authentication, and these are all things that these are steps in the right direction. And they just have to be mandated and adopted as part of, and the government and the regulators have a big role to play on it. And Silicon Valley leaders of companies also have an important role to play on it.
So outside of the economic incentive and, humans being humans, are there other challenges that you think organizations face in meeting these compliance requirements?
Oh, absolutely. So one of the things is, and this is perhaps the reason why all of these are not solved already. If you think about it, right, when you look at a compliance regulation, it says thou shalt do this, and thou shalt do this, and thou shalt have this, and thou shalt not have this, and there are multiple standard bodies that impose compliance. So, for example, HIPAA, if you're in the health industry, if you're a hospital, insurance provider, if you're in the payment card industry, you're looking at PCI, and if you're a public company, then you have to deal with the SEC regulations that have come in. If you are in Europe, you have to deal with DORA, right? These are all written down in English. And most companies will look at them piecemeal and then manually piece together what needs to happen. And this is just an enormous amount of work. It is actually so much work that it's not economically feasible to do it, particularly for the smaller organization. Now, what is a big organization before it is a big organization? It's a small organization.
Yes.
Right? So if you're talking about secure by design, it's like, how do we enable reasonably sized small organization to be on top of these things? And this is where the role of automation comes in. And since a lot of it is based on English language, this is where the role of the intelligent automation, where Gen AI can read some of these specifications and help you come up with a test. How far are you from not just meeting one good standard, but all of the standards that you might be subject to, or a superset of the standard. So doing those things right now takes lifetimes, and therefore it doesn't get done. Or if it gets done, then smaller companies can't afford it. And the AI and automation, this is where the role of AI is pivotal. You can actually shrink it down to, you have this continuous compliance. You're continuously looking at saying, as you're developing software, your co-pilot, if you will, or your assistant, your cybersecurity AI assistant, is constantly looking over your shoulder and saying, do I need to help him or her do something differently in order to stay secure or stay resilient?
Interesting. Have you seen the regulatory landscape evolve in response to growing cyber threats like cloud, AI, soon to be quantum? What does that look like, and where are we heading?
I think it definitely has evolved, but more importantly than evolved, I think what we've seen over the last few years is what I call regulatory activism. And that is regulations with a teak. I'll give you a simple example, right? The airline industry has a regulation that they have to look after, which is called the TSA ASOE. And this is what governs, for example, before you can get on a flight, somebody has to certify that all the applications, software applications that are involved are complying with the TSA ASOE. And it's a big part of what airlines cybersecurity teams have to deal with. Now, what ends up happening is that there was an exception which said, hey, you only need to worry about material applications. Right? And then they changed it recently to all applications. And that is where all hell breaks loose, because material is subjective.
Yeah.
And every CISO was just saying, I can do this much, I'll do this much, and that's
Yeah,
it. As opposed to saying, all, which recognizes the fact that all software is interconnected and everything has to follow the standard.
yeah.
Right? And that becomes very, very difficult. So this regulatory activism is what's examining these little loopholes and saying, what's the remedy? And then trying to close the gap and sharpen the remedies.
Interesting. Are there particular aspects of compliance as it relates to cybersecurity that you think AI is particularly well suited for? We've been experimenting a lot with LLMs, a bunch of different architectures, different models, and it seems to be really good at augmenting humans, but there's no use case that I've encountered where they could do some sort of automated unsupervised process. So I'm just curious if you think there's different areas where this can be applied.
Yeah, I mean, I think the objective, you're absolutely right on one thing, which is that there is AI today, and I think for a long time, is not going to be in a place, and there are fundamental reasons for why I'm saying this. For a whole bunch of reasons, AI is not going to be autonomous in a way that a lot of people worry about.
Mm-hmm.
AI, for example, has very little interaction with the natural world. It's all indirect. And some of the algorithms that we're using are just too expensive and too slow. And there's nothing that suggests that they're moving in the right direction. So that's the wrong way to look at AI. And in my view, the right way to look at AI is the bunch of work which AI can be very, very good at, and which I don't want to do, or it takes me too long to do as a human being. Right. And so we leverage AI for doing that work under my supervision. So I like this idea of thinking about AI as a co-pilot, but a co-pilot is not the pilot in command.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a co-pilot, right? Or an assistant. That's the other way to think about it. And there are fundamental differences between a co-pilot and an assistant. And an assistant is a more evolved co-pilot, maybe, and at least the way we think about it. But they're fundamental differences. So, but the concept is very clear, right? I mean, there's a bunch of things that I will use my assistant for. And one of the things would be, hey, the assistant will help me be situationally aware at the next level of things. But yes, in theory, I could go look at all the data and come back with it, and look at all the data over here and come back with it. But it's boring stuff. Mm-hmm. Who wants to do n-dimensional math in their head all the time?
Yeah.
Right? Nobody wants to do it. So you want some assistant to do that math and tell you, just like a GPS, right? I mean, your GPS gives you turn-by-turn directions. It's an assistant.
Yeah.
Right? The same way AI is, think of AI as a good assistant, like a GPS.
Yeah.
That will tell you, boss, here you go. Now, the GPS is not going to tell me necessarily that I'm going to go drive right off cliff because the maps are wrong. For that, I still need my head, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I need it for. So similarly, it frees up the mind to focus on the stuff that matters and not have to worry about all the nitty-gritty. So there is an enormous amount of opportunity in cybersecurity for work like that. And that's where I think the opportunity is.
Okay. So how would organizations ensure that the AI tools they adopt meet both the security needs and can keep up with the evolving regulatory requirements?
Well, I mean, the real question is, first you have to take a mental shift. And I think that's the bigger challenge that a lot of people are surmounting with. That's the one they need to get past first, which is to come to the realization, and it's not that hard. It's just two things. One is that the current way is not working.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I cannot deal with regulatory activism or the cybersecurity requirements, and they're all correlated, if I keep doing what I'm doing today. My entire cybersecurity apparatus will just become a compliance apparatus, and it will never be able to give me high confidence assertions around my compliance. So work tried, but not finished. My entire cybersecurity apparatus will not be able to protect the business or keep risk at acceptable levels. Therefore, well tried, but you're not going to win. So the first thing is come to that realization that the amount of work to be done is not doable by traditional methods. Once you do that, then you go to the second phase, which just says, so what kind of architecture do I want? And what's the role of the AI and automation and non-AI and, LLMs and Gen AI and other types of AI like, XGBoost and Bayesian models and all that. You collect them on, and how are AI is going to talk to each other. And then it becomes another system design problem.
Yeah.
Because how do you make it more resilient? Like assume AI is going to be implemented just like software.
Yeah.
And software, as you talked about, human beings will make mistakes
Yeah.
by using the software, by training their AI, and by programming the AI. So if they do make a mistake, how do we have these little boxes in there and fault containment boundaries, just like a ship has watertight compartments, like a bridge has trusses, so that if you have a local failure, it can minimize. So we know how to do this.
Yep.
We just have to want to do this.
Yeah. You mentioned security challenges with AI, and I couldn't help but think about, like, are we suffering from the same problems, creating the same problems all over again in the rush to get AI out? Like, I know there's a lot of calls for oversight and regulatory compliance, but it feels like the technology just moves faster than anybody can keep up.
Yeah, certainly. Absolutely. I mean, I think there is certainly some danger of that AI gets ahead of itself. And we repeat all the problems that we created with the internet and software and now we have the AI cybersecurity problem.
Yeah.
We are just all
Yeah, I have a good friend, Tim Fowler, that works on cybersecurity of space systems. And it sounds like they have a similar problem, but not so much from a race to market, but because the people that all build these space systems are in academia or come from a strong academic background and don't really think about bad guys wanting to break things. They just want to go do cool stuff in space. So
cool stuff in space. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the last one I have for you. It's the one I ask of everybody that comes onto the show. It can be as wide or as narrow as you want. Do you have any predictions for the future of cybersecurity?
I think the way I would put it is cybersecurity going forward, it's going to be about information fighting information, or more correctly, insights fighting insights. That's how information security or even security has always been. It's been a little bit of the game of numbers, like, how many soldiers versus how many soldiers of your army, or how many policemen versus how many organized crime that you might have. But more importantly, it's always been a story about insights fighting insights. And I think in the next 3 to 5 years, or even 1 to 5 years, you're going to see that come to full force. Like there'll be the AI-powered programs, and there'll be not-so-powered programs. And you'll start seeing how they're powered programs. The people who embrace AI in a more practical and a pragmatic way as ones that are going to get ahead. In cybersecurity also.
So on the offensive side, or from the threat actor side, you see them becoming more capable and more evolved by leveraging AI, and that people on the defensive side who keep up with that, who lean into the technology, they'll stay protected where other people will fall by the wayside. Is that what you're angling
absolutely. At? And the first thing you said, it's already happened.
Yeah.
Like last year, a lot of us agreed that this AI-powered attack was just to come.
Yeah.
Mostly not yet to come. This year, it's all over the place. And it's just AI-powered email for phishing, or the AI-powered, there's deepfakes or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's here.
Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating stuff. What an interesting industry and time to be alive, I often think. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the show. It was a real pleasure talking to you, and I wish you all the best with Balbix.
And thank you so much.